Hashtag a brief story conquering oneself and standing in line. The emotional line is slow, do not look when anxious, there are saved manuscripts, but the coding is slow. There are inevitably shortcomings in writing a novel for the first time. If you like it, you can add a bookshelf. If someone urges you to change, it will be faster, if not, it will be easier as you please. Serious introduction. Su Lingfeng Cheng Yang, the scorching summer with mottled tree shadows and the tireless night with cicadas chirping. Su Lingfeng knocked on the door of his neighbor's house next door, and the first moment he saw a man, he felt an indescribable sensation lingering in his heart. "What's up?" The frail man looked up at him, his gaze swept over his face, and he was slightly stunned before pursing his lips. "Hello, I am your neighbor." Su Lingfeng curved his eyes and smiled. The summer breeze brushed over her hair, and Cheng Yang's heart was in an unknown world. A tsunami was triggered. This is not their first encounter anymore. Tip. The architecture of this article has no prototype and is purely personal and fictional. It is carefully considered and should not be read wishing everyone a pleasant reading experience. Chapter 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The hottest summer in Su Lingfeng's memory, when the wind blew, it was dry and hot. The lush trees couldn't block the temperature of the sun, and the scorching light shone on him, which was a provocation of summer's arrogance. The cicadas chirped tirelessly, and Su Lingfeng dragged a half-person high suitcase onto the small tricycle of Meng Jiayu's neighbor in the same village. Following the swaying amplitude of the tricycle, he swayed left and right. When he reached Pingxi village, his waist was numb in half. Su Lingfeng looked at the red tiles and white walls in front of him, and the appearance of the old house in his memory gradually became clear, overlapping with the small third floor in front of him. He came here when he was very young, and Ms. Meng Jiayu would slowly shake the fan and hum a tune to lull him to sleep in the hot summer nights. Later, Su Jiwen had a conflict with Ms. Meng Jiayu and took him to the north. He rarely returned and only maintained phone contact with Ms. Meng Jiayu. Later on, with busy work, the frequency of communication became shorter and shorter. His father once mortgaged his house for stock trading, but later decided to divorce due to his wife's lack of support for his career. He left when his wife fell ill, indirectly killing his mother. As a father, Su Jiwen has never given Su Lingfeng the care he deserves. In Su Lingfeng's memory, Su Jiwen couldn't be considered a competent father and husband. The door, which seemed to be too old to handle at any time, creaked as it opened from inside. An old lady walked out with a bamboo basket in her hand. She was taken aback when she saw Su Lingfeng, and then smiled happily with a wide grin. Tears slowly welled up in her eyes, and she spoke in a tone of anger, "Why didn't you come over and make a phone call in advance? They're all so tall. Grandma." Su Lingfeng threw away his suitcase and took a big step up to embrace the old lady's thin body. In the spare time, he caught a glimpse of the old lady's grayish hair and a sour nose. "Have you been doing well lately?" The old lady nodded repeatedly and said, "I have eaten my fill and slept soundly. I'm not as busy as you young people." Meng Jiayu's hands were warm and dry, gently patting the boy's back, making Su Lingfeng feel an urge to cry. But he restrained himself. He couldn't show a joke to Ms. Meng as soon as he came back. The entrance is not a good place to reminisce about the past. The old lady picked up the basket and called him in, poured a cup of tea, looked at his suitcase, and asked, "Did you argue with your dad?" Su Lingfeng smiled helplessly, "You still understand him?" The old lady snorted, knowing her own son's virtues the best. Su Lingfeng studied design at university and achieved some results in his field after graduation. Su Jiwen has always wanted him to help him in the financial field. After graduation, in order to help him change his career, he added a lot of trouble to his job. After a big argument with him, Su Lingfeng quit his job and sat in a car far away from the Su family, dragging his suitcase. Su Lingfeng has always missed the old lady very much, and almost without hesitation, he bought a ticket back to Pingxi village. Pingxi village is not an economically developed place, nor is it famous. Even though the tourism industry has developed rapidly in recent years, there are not many tourists coming to the village. Pingxi village doesn't have any stunning scenery, but it excels in its picturesque mountains and clear waters, simple folk customs, and a more peaceful atmosphere than the fast-paced urban life. Your dad didn't know you were here, did he? The old lady sat on the rocking chair, speaking of her son in a faint tone. Just stay at ease for a while when you're here, and let your dad think it through on his own. Su Lingfeng nodded and took out a square box from his suitcase, handing it to the old lady. Is this popular in your village now? The old lady took the box and weighed it, feeling a bit heavy. She opened the lid and inside lay a small dancing machine with a screen. Yeah. The old ladies in the village like to gather together and dance square dances recently. The leader pulls up a black radio in the village's open space every night, playing a few monotonous songs inside and leading everyone to learn some simple dance steps by stepping on the beat. Ms. Meng has always been interested in dancing, but she can't remember the movements. It's not surprising how happy she was when she saw the dance machine that Su Lingfeng took out. Ms. Meng's memory is the best among elderly women of the same age, and she learned how to use the dance machine without spending much time and energy. After settling in his residence, Ms. Meng happily brought the dance machine out of the door, leaving Su Lingfeng to pack his luggage at home. The third floor of the small three-story building has always reserved a room for him, with good lighting. The sunlight shines through the window and sprinkles on the inside, and the dust inside is clearly visible. As soon as Su Lingfeng opened the door, his face was covered in dust. He covered his mouth and nose with one hand and waved his hand in mid-air. He reluctantly withdrew, rolled up his sleeves, and poured a basin of water. Cleaning the room took him an afternoon, and it was almost evening after finishing his work. The sound of cicadas has not stopped, and the afterglow of the setting sun falls on the window eaves. Outside, there are sounds of chickens and ducks that cannot be seen or heard in the city. Su Lingfeng slowly relaxed amidst these sounds, feeling a sense of indescribable calmness. Opening the phone that had been idle for the whole afternoon, the screen displayed several greetings from friends and several missed calls. Su Lingfeng only glanced at it before frowning and sliding his hand, pulling Su Jiwen into the blacklist. There were only a few messages in WeChat, one of which was sent from Xiagaequan. When he saw it, he dialed a phone and it quickly answered. The speaker's voice was excited. Su Lingfeng, have you returned to Pingxi village? Gao Quan held up the phone with one hand and packaged the fruit in his hand with the other hand, labeling it with a tracking number and preparing to send it out later. The excitement in his tone couldn't be concealed. I'll go find you tomorrow. Gao Quan has been living in Pingxi village since childhood. During the time when Su Lingfeng lived there, he spent every day with Gao Quan. Later, Su Lingfeng left and unexpectedly got into a school with Gao Quan in high school. He has been in contact with him ever since. He doesn't like reading, so after the college entrance examination, he chose to take a leave of absence and return to Pingxi village to help his family's orchard live stream sales. When Su Lingfeng arrived at the station, he sent him a message, and Gao Chuanxia immediately called him when he saw it. Su Lingfeng responded to him and reminded him, come later tomorrow. I'm exhausted today. Okay, you're asleep. Gao Quan agreed after some discussion. I'll bring you some fruit tomorrow to make up for it. Okay. Su Lingfeng unconsciously smiled, his eyebrows and eyes relaxed. Ms. Meng returned to listen to the silence on the third floor, and when she went upstairs, she saw Su Lingfeng lying in bed, sleeping aimlessly in all directions. She smiled and closed the door, tiptoeing downstairs. As it got dark, the moon had already come out completely, and the stars could only vaguely see some faint light and shadow. The cicadas on the tree seemed tired and finally stopped their unpleasant cries. The village was so quiet that only the sound of the wind could be heard. Cooking smoke drifted over the house, and the air was filled with the smell of fireworks. The summer in Pingxi village is hot and peaceful. Chapter 2. Chapter 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. At noon, the sun was particularly intense, making it difficult for people to open their eyes. However, Su Lingfeng slept soundly in the room with tightly drawn curtains and no light at all. The air conditioning in the room was turned on very low by him last night, but even so, Su Lingfeng's whole body was stripped up and down, leaving only a pair of shorts, thin and wide, loosely draped around his waist, revealing his tight abdomen. Mrs. Meng only remembered when she had finished cooking that her grandson, who had come over yesterday, was still asleep upstairs. She grabbed a spatula and went upstairs, shouting, "Chuan Chuan, get up and eat." The room door was not locked, and the old lady pushed it in and walked directly to the windowsill, pulling open the thick curtains with one hand. The glaring sunlight outside the window instantly poured into the room, and Su Lingfeng instinctively raised his hand to block it, reluctantly opening his eyes. When he saw the old lady standing in the room clearly, his voice was filled with helplessness. "Just call me out at the door next time. The sun is almost shining on your buttocks, so you young people should wake up early and exercise more." Grandma held a spatula in one hand and quickly rolled up the curtains in the other, then walked towards the door and said, "Let's eat now." Su Lingfeng responded, rubbed his head, lifted the blanket, and got up. Su Lingfeng usually socializes less, and his phone is unusually quiet except for work messages. He didn't look at his phone, and after washing up, he slowly went downstairs to eat. Ms. Meng Jiayu's cooking skills are pretty good, but she can stir-fry some home-cooked dishes without any flashy skills. Today, there are 4 dishes on the table, all of which are loved by Su Lingfeng. The elderly have a bad memory, but they will not forget everything about their loved ones. The old lady didn't like to eat at home and picked up a few large chopsticks before going out. Su Lingfeng followed suit, but he didn't have any acquaintances or places to go in the village, so he picked up a small stool and sat under the shade of a tree at the door. His delicious food attracted a group of free-range chickens and ducks from the village. When they stared at him for the 4th time, Su Lingfeng imitated the rooster's big brother's call and tentatively picked a chopstick of food on the ground. The chicken and duck brothers immediately gathered around, grabbing me and pecking at the ground to eat. Su Lingfeng was overjoyed on the side and was about to pick the second spoonful to land when his bowl was suddenly thrown up and fell to the ground in the next second. With a clang sound like a command, groups of chickens and ducks gathered around. Su Lingfeng's reaction made him almost laugh with anger. The food he had for this meal was also fed to chickens and ducks, and the bowl was smashed. Battle chickens. He gave these big brothers a thumbs up. What is this foolishness about? In a small duplex villa not far away, the boy with a black T-shirt stood in front of the French window on the 2nd floor and shook his head funny. Looking at a person who is not young, they are on par with chickens and ducks. The young man noticed Su Lingfeng before he left, and he was a stranger who had never appeared in Pingxi village before yesterday. But in fact, upon closer inspection, he would notice that Su Lingfeng had a face that resembled the child in an old photo he had seen at Grandma Meng's house. Because Su Lingfeng's current appearance is not much different from when he was a child, if we must say that he does, then we can only say that Su Lingfeng no longer has the childlike feeling on his face, and his overall demeanor is in line with his age group's maturity and stability. Except when feeding chickens, ducks, geese, and dogs. The temperature is very high today. The boy adjusted the air conditioning to the lowest temperature and felt a bit uncomfortable. After standing for a while, he suddenly clenched his hands and coughed lightly at his mouth and nose. Under the shade of a tree outside the window, Su Lingfeng was squatting on the ground, picking up the shattered bowls one by one. The boy glanced at them and turned around to go downstairs. There was a meal brought to him by Grandma Meng downstairs, which had been left for a while, but still slightly steaming. The young man sat at the table, picked up a chopstick of food, and slowly ate it. When Ms. Meng entered the house with a bowl in her hand, Su Lingfeng was about to throw the broken porcelain bowl into the trash can. With just one glance, the old lady could tell what he had done. After teasing her, she pointed to him and said, "You feed me chickens tonight." When Gao Quan walked into the yard carrying large and small bags, he had just finished listening and looked at the old lady with some uncertainty. He hesitated and asked, "Am I? Quanzi is here." The old lady smiled at him, then turned her head and changed her expression. She said unhappily, "I'm talking about him. He's such a big person and even got pecked by a chicken after eating." All right, Su Lingfeng said with a casual expression, "I'll pay attention next time." Gao Quan couldn't help but laugh as he looked at him pleading for mercy, in exchange for Su Lingfeng's slap in the face. Grandma Meng was able to criticize Su Lingfeng, but Gao Quan knew he couldn't beat him. So he immediately restrained his smile and picked up the bag in his hand, gesturing obediently, "Grandma, this is the fruit for you and Brother Chuan. I'll bring it in for you, remember to eat it. Chuan, remember that I attracted you with firepower." After silently shouting in his heart, Gao Quan didn't forget to give Su Lingfeng a warm glance as he carried the fruit to the living room. "Tell me, what's going on? What would make you run back to Pingxi village and stay?" After coming out of home, the two of them walked along the creek. Su Lingfeng walked slowly, one step behind Gao Quan. Gao Quan is not someone who can hold back his words. He just stood still and turned around to face Su Lingfeng. Gao Quan's tone was not urgent, but rather playful. After speaking, he looked at Su Lingfeng and waited for his explanation. He became increasingly addicted to gambling and owed a lot of debt. He couldn't afford to be beaten to death before realizing that he still had a son like me. Those thugs went to my company to cause trouble. As long as I was there, he would keep pestering me. I might as well run away and come back to live for a while. Su Lingfeng listened to the sound of the stream, his expression indifferent mixed with obvious disgust, and slowly said, "I won't help him pay off his debt even a penny." Su Jiwen felt guilty towards Ms. Meng and dared not come to see her, so Su Lingfeng came to Pingxi village thousands of miles away. He knew that Su Jiwen would not entangle with her, so that he could catch his breath briefly. Su Lingfeng left him a sum of money long before he left. He fulfilled his duty as a son and will not take care of him again in the future. It's really not something. Gao Quan spoke in an angry tone and kicked the stone in front of him into the stream. The stone hit the water surface and splashed a splash of water, as if the scumbag father Su Lingfeng had been kicked into the ditch. Su Lingfeng's gaze turned to the slightly murky water surface and reminded him, "Grandma doesn't know yet, I didn't tell her." "It's good not to say it," Gao Quan frowned and said, "Grandma is getting old and can't listen to those annoying things." Thinking of Ms. Meng's intimidating nature, Su Lingfeng finally smiled and nodded in agreement. "How long do you plan to stay here now?" Gao Quan walked side by side with him again, tentatively asking him, "Otherwise, would you come to the orchard to help me?" "Get out of here," Su Lingfeng said, "come back and rest for a while. We'll talk about things in the future. The one who never stops pretending is the foolish fork." Su Lingfeng silently thought in his heart. Anyway, he doesn't plan to do anything before the summer in Pingxi village ends. Chapter 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. On the third day of staying in Pingxi village, dark clouds enveloped the scorching sun, and the air was hot and stuffy. Turning on the air conditioning also made people feel restless and unable to stop it. The cicadas on an unknown tree outside were still calling endlessly, as if celebrating the upcoming heavy rain. Su Lingfeng turned off the air conditioning and stopped being stuffy in the room. He walked downstairs in his slippers and happened to encounter Ms. Meng, who was wearing rain shoes and carrying an umbrella, preparing to go out. "It's going to rain now, where are we going?" Su Lingfeng stopped at the door and asked as he looked outside. When he looked at the old lady again, he realized that she was still carrying a small lunchbox. After a pause, he asked in some surprise, "Who are you going to deliver food to?" "I made a few dishes and sent some to Cheng next door. He lives alone and his health is not good," so he needs to make up for it more. Meng Jiayu finished speaking and immediately stuffed the lunch box and umbrella into Su Lingfeng's hand. He pushed him out of the door and said, "Just in time, you got up and went to deliver the dishes. Xiao Cheng is about the same age as you, and you happen to know each other." Actually, usually Ms. Meng would send a dish to the young man living next door after cooking some good dishes. Perhaps due to poor health, Xiao Cheng rarely goes out. When Ms. Meng saw that he was about the same age as Su Lingfeng, she took more care of him with a compassionate attitude. After finishing the dishes she cooked, Xiao Cheng would occasionally come to help Ms. Meng deal with some big and small problems at home, which almost became a tacit agreement between them. After living in the village for 3 days, Su Lingfeng found out for the first time that there was a neighbor living in a house next door that usually had no people or smoke. At first glance, the area was surrounded by a white painted wall, and the top of the wall was painted tiled blue, resembling a retro-style building from the Republic of China era. It's very different from the 3rd floor in Su Lingfeng's house. No matter what kind of person they are, they can only admire their elegance from a distance. The wind outside is loud, and the trees on both sides are making a loud noise. A muffled thunder sounded from the distant sky, followed by a flash of lightning between the dim clouds, briefly illuminating the dark village. The wind blew with a hint of coolness, and when the second thunder fell, it finally began to rain in the sky. The wind and rain mixed together, melting the hot and dry feeling of summer. Su Lingfeng picked up his umbrella, took a small step to run to the courtyard door, and bent his finger to knock on the tightly closed door. I probably didn't expect someone to visit in such bad weather. It took a while for the faint footsteps to come from the courtyard, accompanied by a faint inquiry from the homeowner. "Who?" When Su Lingfeng was about to respond with his words, the courtyard door opened from inside. When he looked up, he happened to face the owner's somewhat pale face, with a slender and thin body, long eyebrows and thin lips. A pair of peach blossom eyes looked at him with a hint of scrutiny. The homeowner is a young man with poor health. This is Su Lingfeng's first impression of him. Su Lingfeng didn't know how to address him, so he gestured for the lunch box in his hand and explained, "I'm Ms. Meng's grandson, here to bring you some food." Cheng knew who he was at first sight when he opened the door, but only nodded slightly after he had finished introducing him. He leaned aside and made way, "Come in first." The rain grew heavier, and Cheng held an umbrella in one hand and closed the door in the other before leading Su Lingfeng into the room. The style of the house and yard is roughly the same as that of the courtyard during the Republic of China period. Even the young man in front of him is wearing a loose white rolled-edge short jacket embroidered with bamboo leaf patterns, black pants, and a refined atmosphere. Just a few minutes ago, it was both wind and rain blowing outside, and even holding an umbrella, it was still quite wet. As soon as Cheng entered the room, he took a clean towel and gave it to him. Su Lingfeng sat on the sofa wiping the water droplets from his clothes, while Cheng sat on the other side, staring at him without a glance. "Are you Grandma Meng's grandson?" Cheng withdrew his gaze and asked. Su Lingfeng nodded and said, "My name is Su Lingfeng." "Cheng," he replied, glancing at the rain outside the window. Even if he walked back with an umbrella, his whole body would still be soaked. "It's raining outside, you can't go back for now," Cheng said, standing up. "Let's eat here." He didn't give Su Lingfeng a chance to refuse, so he went to the kitchen and served 2 bowls of rice. He also brought out 3 prepared dishes and 1 soup, and arranged the dishes made by Grandma Meng on a plate. Su Lingfeng wiped the water before getting up and sitting across from Cheng. Originally, he was just here to deliver a dish, but now he's even rubbing against the rice. I don't know how Ms. Meng should blame him when she goes back. "Thank you," Su Lingfeng said. Cheng Yang's eating behavior was very gentle, and after finishing his mouth, he slowly spoke up, "Food doesn't speak." Su Lingfeng raised his eyebrows. A meal was exceptionally quiet. After finishing his meal, Cheng slowly wiped his mouth and then spoke naturally, "You wash the dishes." So impolite. Su Lingfeng hesitated for 2 seconds between washing and not washing, then stood up and carried a bowl into the kitchen. When Cheng finished cleaning the kitchen and came out, she leaned back on the sofa and leisurely watched the TV. In the spare time, she caught a glimpse of Su Lingfeng wiping her hands and patting the seat next to her with one hand. "Sit down for a while," she said. The rain outside the window didn't seem to stop for a while, and Su Lingfeng sat down next to him. The TV was playing a recently popular movie, and Su Lingfeng looked up at Cheng, who was watching very seriously on his side, sinking himself into the sofa. It is unknown when Su Lingfeng fell asleep. Cheng paused the movie and took a thin blanket from the room to cover him. Seeing him sleeping soundly, Cheng lowered her head and chuckled, "You can sleep in a stranger's house." Getting closer, Cheng realized that there was an inconspicuous red mole at the end of Su Lingfeng's right eyebrow, which made his eyes very beautiful. Su Lingfeng slept for a long time and quietly read beside him, holding a book. When the rain slightly subsided, a phone call broke this tranquility. Cheng presses the phone, puts the book aside, gets up and walks to the French window, taps his finger twice on the screen, dials back, and says, "What's the matter?" "I don't know what was said over there." Cheng pursed her lips and slowly spoke up for a while, "I know. I'll go for a check-up next week." Hanging up the phone, Cheng let out a tired sigh, then turned around and met Su Lingfeng's puzzled gaze. "When did you wake up?" Cheng walked up to him, reached out to pick up the book on the table, and sat down beside him as if nothing had happened. "Just woke up for a while." Su Lingfeng rubbed his hair. When he woke up, he only heard Cheng say he would go for a check-up, but didn't hear anything clearly about it. He was still confused and his mind was still a mess because he had just woken up. Cheng remained silent and glanced at the gradually brightening sky outside. He folded the blanket that had been covering his body and put it aside. After finishing all this, he paused and slowly said, "You should go now." Chapter 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. After the rain, it cleared up for several consecutive days, and the temperature was not too hot, which was a rare comfort that did not belong to summer. The air was mixed with a faint fragrance of unknown flowers, and the streets were bustling with people. "Oh, it's squeezing me to death." Gao Quan struggled to tiptoe towards Su Lingfeng's seat next to the small stall, carrying a bunch of things from the bustling crowd. "Are you planning to stop coming to town after buying this one?" Su Lingfeng stared at him incredulously, slowly standing up and giving him a hand. "Don't mention it." Gao Quan rolled up his sleeves and wiped his sweat in frustration. "After a while, the autumn harvest will come. The fruits in the garden are ripe and we rely on these things to pick and preserve them. There are also some people who eat, and I have someone send them over." After finishing these words, he changed his tone and asked, "Chuan, what you came to town to buy hasn't been bought yet. I'll accompany you. Let's go." "All right, come on." Su Lingfeng pointed to his pile of treasures with a big head, "Look at these, I'll go by myself." The market in the town is adjacent to the vegetable market and the flower and bird market, and the crowds are the most crowded and noisy, with a strong atmosphere of fireworks. Su Lingfeng squatted in front of a small street stall, his hands slowly picking among the pile of mud figures in front of the stall. Finally, he picked up the unfinished half-body wooden portrait in the corner and touched it with great interest. "This is not for sale, it's not ready yet." The boss is a teenager who speaks fluent local dialect and points to the pile in front of Su Lingfeng, saying, "These can be sold. If you buy them, I'll give you another one." "No need, that's all I want." Su Lingfeng only understood the dialect of Pingxi village and guessed the general meaning based on the boy's movements. Without hesitation, he paid the normal price and asked the young boy to wrap it up for him. Su Lingfeng has a hobby of carving. When he is not working, he usually carves exquisite things from small pieces of wood that he has found at home. It takes a long time and also takes a lot of energy, but he enjoys it. Resigning and coming to Pingxi village was too urgent. Su Lingfeng didn't bring back those things and tools, and could only think of passing the time with other things. This would show that the woodcarver's interest was growing. The young boy gave him a set of tools and also gave him 0. These are for you. Once they are engraved, you can come back next time. The young boy smiled shyly at him. These medications are for 1 month's worth of medication, and once you finish eating them, you need to come for a follow-up check. Don't keep dragging on. In the town center hospital, Xiaoya lifted her glasses, her face serious, paused for a moment, and her gaze swept back and forth on the thin young man across from her. Cheng Yang, haven't you been eating well lately? I ate it. Cheng Yang looked back and saw that the shadow cast by the broken hair in front of his forehead was just covering the helplessness revealed in his eyes for Dr. He's excessive concern about his condition. Dr. He snorted and asked him in reverse, I did eat it, but it's uncertain whether I ate well or not, right? Cheng Yang was left speechless by the meme for a long time, and after a while, he tugged at the corners of his mouth, looking at her with a hesitant expression. Okay, that's it. Doctor He pointed to the office door, buried his head, and started writing down the case history. He said rudely, come back for a follow-up visit next time. As Cheng Yang walked out of the hospital gate, she remembered that her refrigerator was mostly empty. She took a step and went to the market to buy a lot of chicken, duck, fish, meat, and vegetables. She also paid someone to deliver them to Pingxi village. The market next door was also lively and bustling. Cheng Yang glanced casually and his gaze froze after scanning a familiar face. Su Lingfeng is much taller than young people of his age, and he has a completely different feeling from the residents of the small town. Walking in the crowded market, he manages to stand out from the crowd. There was also a slightly chubby young man beside him, and Cheng Yang had a face-to-face meeting with him at Ms. Meng's house before. Su Lingfeng was talking to the chubby young man, but he didn't notice him at all. Cheng Yang looked from a distance for a while, then slowly turned around and walked away, carrying a bag of things. When she got home, it was almost dusk. Grandma Meng sat on the rocking chair at the door, shaking her fan haphazardly. When Cheng Yang first came to Pingxi village, she always liked to carry a chair alone and stay at the door for a whole day. Most of the elderly people left in the village stubbornly stay in the village where the speed down button has been pressed by the times, guarding the old place where they have lived for decades. On lonely days, they hope that their distant relatives can come home and see. Xiao Cheng, are you coming back now? Meng Jiayu stopped shaking her fan hand and smiled at Cheng Yang, because when she got older and laughed, the wrinkles on her face squeezed together, but it didn't seem funny. Instead, it gave people a kind feeling. Cheng Yang slightly raised the corner of his mouth, nodded, and handed out the fruit on his hand, saying, these are for you. After spending some time with Cheng Yang, Meng Jiayu probably knew his temper and didn't refuse. He just said, when dinner is ready, I'll have Chuan bring you some dishes. You're thin and need to make up for it more. When Su Lingfeng knocked on Cheng Yang's door with his lunchbox, Cheng Yang was watering the different varieties of flowers and plants in the yard. Cheng Yang lowered her eyes, holding a gourd in her hand. She bent down slightly and heard a knock on the door, sprinkling water. She spoke calmly, come in, the door is not locked. The door just lightly closed, and Su Lingfeng pushed it in upon hearing the words. He saw the young master who was focused on watering, raised his eyebrows slightly, and smiled curiously, it's the first time I've seen him watering flowers and plants at night. Cheng Yang gave him a sideways glance and slowly finished pouring the last bit of water before speaking casually, I like to water my flowers at night. As you please. Su Lingfeng smiled, clearly interested in his statement. Piao was thrown back into the wooden bucket by him, and Cheng Yang washed her hands with the water in the bucket and sat down in front of the 8 immortals table in the yard. Perhaps the dishes in the lunchbox were to his taste, and Cheng Yang rarely ate more. Su Lingfeng consciously took over his job of watering the flowers while he was eating, scooping water into the flower garden one by one. There are not many delicate flowers in the garden, but the most diverse ones are hydrangea and chamomile. Su Lingfeng even found a few lonely and immature cacti on the edges and corners. When Su Lingfeng watered the flowers and plants, his waist was slightly bent, and the fabric of the black T-shirt on his back was tightly pressed against his waist as his movements changed, outlining the young man's muscular waist in front of him. Cheng only glanced and then stopped looking. It took him a while to react, and after a brief pause in his heart, he reminded angrily, "If you continue to water it like that, my flowers will all die tomorrow." Ah! Su Lingfeng paused and turned his head to look at him, with a rare expression of confusion on his face. He has no experience in raising flowers and plants, and thought that as long as he watered them more, they would grow lush. "Don't be busy." Cheng tidied up his delicious lunchbox and stood up to take the gourd from Su Lingfeng's hand, tilting his wrist and slowly moving it. "Watch," he said. When Cheng Yang's voice was softened, there was a rare tenderness. His broken hair covered his eyes, and Su Lingfeng could only see his thin and distinct jawline and slightly pursed lips. "He is too thin." Su Lingfeng swept him from head to toe, secretly blaming his emaciated body on a condition he had never spoken of before. When he was as old as Cheng Yang, he always climbed over walls and skipped classes at school, and there were countless nagging sounds around him. Unlike Cheng Yang, who lived alone in Pingxi village due to illness. Thinking of this, Su Lingfeng frowned lightly. In the days that followed, even if Ms. Meng didn't leave him every 3 to 5 to deliver something to Cheng Yang, Su Lingfeng would still prepare Cheng Yang's portion and sit in front of him, watching him finish his meal. Of course, that was all later on. Chapter 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The weather has cleared up for some days, and the air is slowly becoming dull again. It's probably going to rain again. Su Lingfeng has been staying in Pingxi village for a month without realizing it. Every day, he follows Gao Quan to tease chickens and walk dogs, waking up from his dreams amidst the chirping of cicadas. When the rain came down, Su Lingfeng was carving a wooden portrait that he had bought from town a few days ago in the courtyard of the Cheng family. Cheng Yang was reading on a lounge chair under the eaves. The sound of cicadas is almost imperceptible amidst the thunder and rain, only the rustling wind blowing through the leaves. The cool breeze blows in, and the temperature is just right. Su Lingfeng simply moved the wooden figurine and tools under the eaves and slowly carved them by Cheng Yang's side. Cheng Yang was tired of reading and turned her head to look at the wooden figure whose facial contours had gradually emerged on Su Lingfeng's hand. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. This wooden figure is like a miniature version of Cheng Yang, gradually refined in Su Lingfeng's hands. At first, he thought Su Lingfeng was bored and used to pass the time, but now it looks like this, but he is mistaken. No wonder Su Lingfeng has been lingering around for a while after delivering the food these days, without any intention of leaving. Su Lingfeng traced the shape of his eyes with a carving knife, turned his head to take a look at Cheng Yang's face, only to find that Cheng Yang was focused on the wooden carving in his hand and smiled. He spread out his palms so that Cheng Yang could look more carefully. "I carved it according to you, but it's been too long since I made it. The speed of carving has slowed down a lot," Su Lingfeng explained. Cheng Yang's gaze shifted from the wooden figure to Su Lingfeng's face, and after a while, he didn't open his eyes. His face appeared indifferent, lazily lifting his chin, but his tone was slightly upward, and he said, "It's okay." After spending a month together, Su Lingfeng got to know him better. A 20-year-old man, he doesn't talk much, is a bit arrogant, and his temperament is also not awkward. This obviously ambiguous tone made him have some teasing thoughts. "Oh." Su Lingfeng spoke in a long tone, withdrew his hand and continued to carve, casually saying, "Then I'll keep it for myself." Cheng Yang's slender fingers rested on the book page, his fingertips caressing the corners of the page. Upon hearing this, he paused as he was about to turn the book, seeming to be stuttering. After a while, he became depressed and said, "Why is there a reason to take back something that should be given to someone? You said you don't like it." Su Lingfeng lowered his head, sketched his fingers a few times, and a pair of beautiful peach blossom eyes immediately rippled on the wooden face. "I didn't say anything either," Cheng retorted, but his voice suddenly dropped in the middle. "I don't like." After finishing speaking, he pursed his lips as if feeling a bit embarrassed, stood up, rolled his sleeves, and walked into the room. This rain comes and goes quickly. After the rain, the air was cool and the uneven areas on the road accumulated a lot of water. A few scattered leaves fell into the puddles, reflecting against the roof tiles on the water surface. The cicadas chirped tirelessly again. "I don't know how long this summer will pass." When Su Lingfeng finished carving and walked into the house with a wooden figure in his hand, Cheng was coughing low with one hand covering his lips. When he came in, he tilted his face and his face looked a bit ugly. Su Lingfeng casually placed the wooden man on the table, frowned and poured him a glass of water, asking, "Where's your medicine?" "In the room." Cheng pursed her lips and took a sip of water, her face softened, but she still didn't look very good. Su Lingfeng opened the cabinet to find the medicine he needed. When his gaze touched the miscellaneous medicines in the cabinet, he paused for a while before retracting his gaze and taking the medicine downstairs. After taking the medicine, Cheng Yang's face finally improved. He pursed his lips and watched Su Lingfeng sit on the opposite sofa, facing him. Su Lingfeng's expression was somewhat indescribable and serious. His words rolled around in his mouth a few times, but he didn't know how to speak. Cheng didn't say a word. He thought Su Lingfeng would ask him something, but he waited and waited until Su Lingfeng let out a long sigh. "When is the next inspection?" Su Lingfeng's voice was not loud, but it was clear and audible in the quiet house. Cheng didn't know what he meant, so she looked up at him and slowly said, "At the beginning of next month." "I'll go with you next time," Su Lingfeng said. He actually wanted to ask Cheng something, but when the words reached his mouth, he swallowed them back. He didn't know how to speak or ask, and even if he asked Cheng about their current relationship, Cheng might not be willing to tell him. Cheng didn't respond, remained silent and turned her head. It was only when Su Lingfeng thought he wouldn't answer that Cheng slowly said, "Let's talk about it." This is the meaning of rejection. Although he had anticipated that he would refuse, as soon as the rejection came out, Su Lingfeng couldn't help but feel a bit annoyed. He had no intention of needing his help at all. What were he thinking about here? There was silence inside the room, and Cheng was thinking of an explanation in her mind. Just as she was about to speak, Su Lingfeng stood up and pointed outside. Her voice was faint, like the coolness after the rain outside. "The rain has stopped, I'll go back." One sentence blocked Cheng prepared draft tightly. "Okay." Cheng didn't keep him, nodded and stood up. Until Su Lingfeng's figure disappeared at the door, he silently looked at the wooden carving on the table that looked 8 or 9 times similar to him. The wood carving was not painted, it was left to him by Su Lingfeng to be painted, but Cheng only looked carefully and placed the wood carving on the table in the room. Su Lingfeng had just left in anger, and Cheng didn't know if he would come again. He suddenly felt a little regretful and thought, why didn't he just call Su Lingfeng or explain something to him? Forget it. Cheng lowered his eyes, even if he went back to just now, he could explain something when he spoke. Whether it was mentioning his illness or his family, he couldn't speak up. He didn't want anyone to care for him out of pity. Cheng clearly built a high wall between him and everyone except him. He would not cross that wall, and others would not be able to cross that wall. Care and pity are the least he needs. Su Lingfeng may be different from others, but Cheng cannot let Su Lingfeng cross that wall. It's good to have himself in his world. Ms. Meng hummed a tune softly on the lounge chair, lazily squinting her eyes. She caught a glimpse of someone coming in from outside and opened her eyes. "Are you back so early?" These days, Su Lingfeng has to stay at Cheng Yang's place until dinner before coming back, or else he has to help Gao Quan. It's rare to see him come back so early. Su Lingfeng casually responded and said hello before going upstairs. Ms. Meng has entered the room, and she has opened the curtains to let in light. The bedding has also been folded over and neatly placed at the end of the bed. Su Lingfeng sat down at his desk, checked the names of several medicines on his phone, and confirmed that what he was thinking was the same as Cheng Yang's illness, with a slightly unpleasant expression on his face. Cheng Yang lives alone in Pingxi village, without the company of family and little contact with the outside world. From another perspective, it is no different from waiting for death. If Su Lingfeng had been a bit frustrated before, now he feels an indescribable feeling in his heart. The phone screen suddenly popped up with an incoming call display. Su Lingfeng glanced at the note and answered the phone, saying, "Chui Xiao." "You said." Su Lingfeng's previous company was more like a private design studio, providing design solutions specifically for the upper class. Su Lingfeng worked there for 2 years and also accumulated a group of loyal customers due to his unique design style and philosophy. Chui Xiao came to him this time to inform him that he has an old client who wants him to help design a new logo. That client Su Lingfeng remembers that he had introduced many new clients to him, and the two of them also had some friendship. He resigned in a hurry this time, but he forgot to say hello to that person. "Okay, I'll hand it over to him by the end of the month. You can ask him to point out the areas he's not satisfied with and I'll make the necessary changes." Su Lingfeng agreed. "You can add his contact information, it will be more convenient for you to communicate directly." The voice on the other side of the phone paused and added, "You don't need to pay a commission to the company on this account. Just treat it as if you took on your own private work, to ease your father's situation." "Thank you." Su Lingfeng didn't tell him that he didn't plan to meddle in Su Jiwen's affairs anymore. Coincidentally, he also needed to save some money and happily accepted Chui Xiao's affection. Chapter 6. You are listening at novelfull.audio. When the sun appeared from the east and the fish belly white slowly rose, there was not much movement in the village. Gradually, every house had a subtle sound, and then the smoke slowly rose from the kitchen. The sound of each conversation was noisy and leisurely. Su Lingfeng found a time to go to the town to buy all the necessary drawing tools for his work because he had taken on a job. After returning home, he would sit in his room and write and draw, rarely leaving the room except for eating and sleeping. So the person who went to deliver food to Cheng Yang every now and then turned into Ms. Meng. Cheng Yang sat down at the 8 Immortals table, holding the lunchbox in his hand, pursing his lips and staring at the lunchbox in a daze for a long time. Finally, he lowered his eyes and took a bite of the slightly warm and cold food that had been stored for a long time. Half a month has passed since we finished our work, during which there were several moderate rains. The village no longer had the scorching heat of summer, and the air was filled with a faint fragrance of osmanthus. Occasionally, we could hear a few faint cicadas chirping. Su Lingfeng lifted his head from his desk and sent the pre-arranged logo design to the client. Taking advantage of the gap before receiving a reply, he stood up and moved his neck, which was somewhat stiff. The customer replied quickly, "Except for a few details that need to be revised, there are generally no issues." After the matter was finalized, Su Lingfeng finally breathed a sigh of relief. Several details could be slowly modified. He went downstairs and happened to meet Ms. Meng, who was about to leave. "Are you done with your work?" Meng Jiayu was also surprised when she saw him at this moment, and she responded by directing him casually. "I have arranged for a few of your aunties to play mahjong. After dinner, you can go and call the chickens and ducks back to feed them, and then drive them to their nest." Su Lingfeng raised his eyebrows and joked, "It's already dark and you're still sitting at the table." Meng Jiayu let out a sigh and said, "If you don't play mahjong, you can go to the village square and have a look. There's a theater troupe coming tonight, and we older people don't like it. Don't stay at home every day and shout for Quaner to play. Su Lingfeng responded and explained as he walked towards the kitchen, actually, we young people don't look much at it either. At this point in the evening, a faint red glow can be seen on the horizon, and the sky is also pleasing to the eye. After finishing his meal, Su Lingfeng immediately grabbed a basin and knocked on it, not very proficient in learning from Ms. Meng's shouting voice. He shouted softly, "Cluck." After busy work for a while, he finally brought back these precious chickens and ducks. Watching the chickens and ducks happily eating around the feed trough, he also smiled and hummed a tune. He grabbed one of the ducks on the back with his hand and kept following the duck feathers. When Gao Quan entered the door, he saw this scene and couldn't help but think of 4 words. Mother's kindness, son's filial piety. When Su Lingfeng looked up, Gao Quanzheng stared at him with an inscrutable expression, let go of Brother Duck, clapped his hands, and stood up to ask, "Why did you come?" "Brother Chuan, will we go see a play together tonight?" Gao Quan said, smiling as he leaned over to him. "Let's go and see together. It's boring to be alone at home." Su Lingfeng has always been not very interested in traditional Chinese opera. He remembers that Gao Quan is not someone who loves watching dramas at all. He usually likes to play online games, so he suddenly becomes interested in watching dramas. There must be some tricks involved. "I won't go," Su Lingfeng yawned. He had been busy for a long time and hadn't slept well. He was feeling sleepy now and lazily said, "I'm going to sleep." "Don't, Brother Chuan. It's not even dark to sleep." Gao Quan grabbed him, pointed to the sky, and smiled, "Just treat it as my happiness." "What happiness?" Su Lingfeng raised his eyebrows and looked at him, "Which girl do you have a crush on?" Gao Quan chuckled and muttered, "You're really a worm in my stomach." Su Lingfeng looked at him incredulously and said, "Fuck me." "What strange metaphor is this?" "Civilization," Gao Quan said solemnly. The theatrical troupe in the village arrived 2 days earlier and set up a platform here in advance. When Gao Quan went out the day before yesterday, he happened to encounter a female character from the troupe, with willow eyebrows, slender waist, long legs, a delicate face, and a charming smile, which immediately made him feel a bit tempted. "That girl is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," Gao Quan concluded with certainty and looked at Su Lingfeng. "Brother, you can accompany me to take a look." Su Lingfeng was really worn down by him and finally nodded to accompany him towards the village. A relatively small platform was set up at the village head, with many props placed on it. Many people came to watch the excitement, most of whom were children sent over by their own adults. They carried long benches and bags of snacks, excitedly sitting in front of the stage. Among the remaining people, there are elderly people, young people who stay in the village to start businesses, middle-aged women, and uncles. These people remember the fun of childhood and also come to make a scene. "Sorry to give way." A hand reached out from the side and gave him a flick. It was a middle-aged man, speaking a pure dialect, and with a swoop, he squeezed past him. Cheng frowned and retreated to the side again. He followed Su Lingfeng out of the door and walked towards the village. As soon as he arrived, he lost sight of too many people and looked around in confusion, trying to find Su Lingfeng's figure in the crowded crowd. "Chuan Gu, here." Gao Quan didn't move a chair and quickly squeezed into the front row next to a pile of children. He apologized and then occupied 2 vacant seats, raising his hand to invite Su Lingfeng to come and sit. "Brother Quanzi, you don't have the face to bully the child." The eldest child pointed at him and made a grimace. Gao Quan stayed in the village for a long time and was familiar with the children in the village. He didn't care at all and pulled the child over, patting his head and coaxing him, "All right, my second child, you can sit on a chair for me. After that, I'll treat you to delicious food." Upon hearing the food, Erwa's eyes lit up and she led a few children to play on the side. Su Lingfeng walked over and sat next to him, helplessly saying, "You can also deceive children." Gao Quan chuckled, when did I ever deceive a child? Su Lingfeng didn't answer him, but turned his head to look at the suddenly dimming lights on stage, lifted his chin, and said, it's starting. Today's play is the famous Do Yi's Injustice. When the lights lit up again, a tall and graceful female character named Shiran stepped onto the stage, her peach blossom eyes rippling with water, and she sang loudly, my name is Do Yi. That's her. Gao Quan had a hint of inexplicable pride on his face. How about it, isn't it very beautiful? Before the opera actors came on stage, they all applied watercolor paint to their makeup, but it was not clear what she was looking like. Gao Quan was clearly showing off her extravagant energy, and this worthless appearance made Su Lingfeng unable to resist laughing. Why are you laughing? Aren't you good? Looking, said Gao Quan in a hurry. It looks good, Su Lingfeng coughed lightly. The female protagonist's voice is gentle, with smoke and waves flowing between her words, accompanied by the music played by the eru and other instruments on the stage and behind the scenes, creating an atmosphere that is not always good. Even though Cheng Yang was far away, he immediately looked up and saw the appearance of the female character on stage. After a moment of surprise, he pursed his lips and stood up, leaving the venue from behind. Chapter 7. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. The night was dark, and the atmosphere reached its climax at the moment of Do Yi's death. Dry snow powder, acting as a snowflake prop, fell from the top of the stage, blending with the bright red blood. Do Yi lay in a pool of blood with her eyes closed, silent. The curtain slowly closed until the female character on stage was completely invisible, and enthusiastic applause erupted from below. Su Lingfeng covered his ears and glanced sideways at Gao Quan, who was extremely excited. His tone was somewhat helpless, and he sighed and said, don't drum so hard, your ears are going to be deaf. You don't understand, the louder I applaud, the happier she must be as a theatrical actress. Gao Quan stood up and followed a few young people rushing towards the backstage, shouting, don't wait for me. You go first, I'll go get a signature. No, you can't leave. Erwa quickly ran over with a few other children and grabbed Su Lingfeng's clothes. If Quanzi brother leaves, you have to buy us delicious food. You are a team, and you have to take responsibility for him. Okay. Su Lingfeng pointed to the direction where Gao Quan left with a hint of amusement. He's gone, brother Chuan will take you to buy food. The shop at the village head is nearby, and Erwa guided Su Lingfeng with concentration. Along the way, there are many villagers walking home, and the footsteps are scattered and leisurely, just like the countless nights they have spent in Pingxi village. The size of the store looks very small from a distance. The light at the entrance is warm yellow, but it is a bit dark due to prolonged use. On the bench under the light, there is a thin man sitting with short hair and crossed hands on his legs. The man looked against the light and couldn't see his face clearly, but Su Lingfeng inexplicably connected him with Cheng Yang. Su Lingfeng. The man put down his leg at the moment he saw him, slowly stood up, and looked at him with an unclear expression. It's really Cheng Yang. Su Lingfeng raised his eyebrows in surprise, not understanding why Cheng Yang was sitting at the store entrance. In the month since he came, memory mileage Yang has not been very well known. But he quickly remembered the unpleasant experience half a month ago, and then lowered his head to pat the little dwarf next to him on the head. His tone was gentle and he said, Erwa, can you take them to pick first? I'll talk to this brother for a while. Erwa glanced at Cheng Yang and smiled at Su Lingfeng, then let's go buy it. The evening breeze blows slowly, making it very comfortable. The tree shadow swayed, casting a layer of silver light on the ground. In the store, there are lively people chatting, and outside the door, there are young people staring at each other without words. Cheng Yang hung his head in a daze, their shadows entwined under the moonlight in his eyes. Why are you here? Su Lingfeng walked up to Cheng Yang and sat side by side with him, with a faint tone of inquiry. I'm here to watch the play. Cheng Yang turned her head slightly, her gaze fixed on the person beside her for a moment, and then said, "Tonight is very comfortable, not too hot. Come out for a walk." How could someone who came out to watch the play sit here alone? I'm probably here to explain to him. Su Lingfeng was clear in his heart, but he didn't expose his words or delve into why he was sitting alone so far from the stage. He just curled his lips and agreed, "The wind tonight is also very gentle." "Yes," Cheng pondered word by word before speaking again. "Did you get angry that day?" "No." After half a month, when I remembered what happened that day, the inexplicable frustration in my heart had long subsided. Su Lingfeng laughed at himself for being too sensitive. "I was busy with some things after that day, but I just had some free time recently," Su Lingfeng explained, probably because he was afraid he wouldn't believe me. Cheng nodded and inexplicably breathed a sigh of relief. He hesitated and said, "Actually, if you had." "Brother Chuan." A childish voice came out of the store, and Su Lingfeng followed the source of the sound. Erhua was waving at him with 2 packets of potato chips. Su Lingfeng stood up with an apologetic tone and said, "Wait for me. If you have time, you can accompany me to take a look." Cheng whispered towards his back. The second half of the sentence that Su Lingfeng couldn't hear was heard by the cicadas tirelessly chirping on the branches, so they shouted even harder. After paying the money and sending away the children, Su Lingfeng lifted his foot and walked out, lifting his chin towards Cheng who was still sitting. "Let's go home," he said. Cheng stood up and followed behind him. Su Lingfeng was even taller than ordinary boys and took big steps, making it difficult to keep up with him. Su Lingfeng probably noticed this, frowned, and quietly slowed down his pace. Cheng is not short in stature, but her body is too thin, and she looks about the same age as a teenager of 17 or 18 years old. Cheng walked slowly side by side with him, and under the night, Su Lingfeng's facial features became more profound. In fact, when he first saw Su Lingfeng, the first thing he noticed was his face. Long eyebrows and cold eyes, a pair of phoenix eyes slightly raised, a high nose bridge, deep facial features, and an indescribable coldness when looking at someone who is not speaking. However, looking at such a cold person, their temperament is rare and gentle. He will patiently listen to Grandma Meng's chatter, tease Grandma Meng's chickens and ducks, and the stray dogs in the village who have no owners. He will silently take care of himself in his own way. Su Lingfeng, like Grandma Meng, is a very good person. As he was about to come to his senses, Su Lingfeng kicked away the small stone on the ground in front of him and asked, "By the way, what did you just want to say?" Cheng shook his head and whispered, "It's nothing. The village is not far from Ms. Meng Jiayu's house, and the lights in the house only lit up shortly after we arrived home. Meng Jiayu has just returned not long ago. I'm going back." Su Lingfeng looked at him and said. "Okay," Cheng nodded. As he was about to walk inside, he thought for a moment and added, "Your favorite silk orchid in the flower garden before has bloomed." "Okay, I'll go see it." Su Lingfeng's eyebrows and eyes curved, and his tone softened, "Good night." "Good night." Cheng was satisfied with his reply before curling her lips, and the hand hanging beside her unconsciously pinched it. Su Lingfeng's figure disappeared into the door in front of him, leaving the door silent for a moment. The sound of cicadas and frogs echoed in unison, giving people a sense of tranquility. As the night grew darker, every household in Pingxi village was lit with warm or cold lights. Cheng looked at it for a long time and slowly pushed open the door of the Cheng family's old house on the cobblestone road. The courtyard lights were also on, but compared to the lights he had seen, he felt something was missing. The shadow of the lamp is stretched long by the moonlight. The flowers and plants in the garden are growing well, and the silk orchids are blooming warmly. Chapter 8. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It was originally agreed that after finishing the rest of the work, he would go to the old residence of the Cheng family to see the flowers. However, after Su Lingfeng had completely free time, it had already been 3 days. Before Su Lingfeng went to see the flowers next door, the first person to visit became Cheng Yang. The weather is rarely cloudy, but still a bit hot. The air conditioning is running non-stop, making a noise that seems to compete with the chirping of cicadas outside the window. Su Lingfeng was sleeping comfortably with his head covered. Suddenly, he heard a sharp noise. When he lifted the blanket, he met Ms. Meng Jiayu, who came upstairs upon hearing the sound. The old lady's eyes were filled with doubts identical to his. Startled for a moment, Su Lingfeng looked up again at the buzzing air conditioner, opened his mouth, but was so surprised that he couldn't make a sound. In addition to making a piercing sound, the air conditioner also shakes violently, looking like it's about to explode in the next second. Meng Jiayu took a few steps forward and unplugged the power, then asked strangely, "What's wrong with the air conditioning?" Su Lingfeng shook his head, got up, and looked at Ms. Meng Jiayu for a while before patting his head and touching the phone on the bedside. "I'll call someone to fix it," he said. "Who can you call to repair it?" The old lady said and rose. "The repairman in the town will come after several days of contact. You go ask Xiao Cheng for help," the old lady said. Su Lingfeng turned his head to look at the old lady, his eyes puzzled. Cheng Yang looked like a young master who knew nothing about life. How could he repair an air conditioner? Meng Jiayu opened her mouth and was about to say something when a knocking came from outside the courtyard downstairs. On the third floor, she could only hear it clearly, but Su Lingfeng could see Cheng Yang's thin body at a glance from the windowsill. As if feeling something, Cheng Yang outside suddenly lifted her head. At the moment when her gaze met, it seemed as if she had hooked her lips. The air conditioner is severely aging, and the core inside is broken. In Su Lingfeng's room on the third floor, the air conditioning had just been removed, and Cheng Yang was still holding a filter in his hand, turning his head to explain to Su Lingfeng, who was lazily leaning against the door and staring at him. Su Lingfeng raised his eyebrows and said, "Do you still know how to fix air conditioning?" "That's right, everything in my house was broken before, it was all repaired by Xiao Cheng." Meng Jiayu's voice came in from outside, holding a plate of watermelons in her hand and placing it on the table by the door. She smiled and said, "Remember to eat the watermelons." After finishing speaking, he turned around and smiled, then said to Su Lingfeng, "Remember to hit Xiao Cheng." So this is the difference between a biological grandson and a cousin grandson. The tone of speech is different. Su Lingfeng shook his head and sighed, then asked Ms. Meng's biological grandson, "Can the air conditioner be repaired?" Cheng Yang looked at the air conditioner inside and outside, shook his head, and said, "If you want to repair it, the price can buy another air conditioner to use." "Then let's go buy it." Su Lingfeng reached out and picked up a watermelon with a bamboo stick inserted. Cheng Yang's hand was still dirty, and he handed it to Cheng Yang's mouth. Cheng Yang lowered his head and slowly picked up the watermelon in his hand, eating it. "I'll go with you," Cheng Yang said vaguely. Su Lingfeng didn't refuse either. He nodded and inserted a piece of watermelon into his mouth. After confirming that the air conditioner was not in use, Su Lingfeng moved it downstairs. Cheng Yang washed his hands in the bathroom of the room. Before Su Lingfeng returned, his gaze swept around the room, which was somewhat of a visit. The room where Su Lingfeng lives is very large. In addition to the bed, wardrobe, and desk, there is also an exhibition cabinet, which contains many design-related books and magazines. The remaining space is basically empty. It's normal for him to stay for a short time and not have much to eat. Cheng Yang's gaze fell on the desk, where a large stack of materials was placed in front of the computer. Several scrap design concept drafts were placed on the blank table on the right. Although the drafts were rejected by Su Lingfeng himself, the design concepts and integrated elements on the paper still showed that he was an excellent designer. "Don't look." Su Lingfeng looked at the door for a long time, but suddenly made a sound that surprised Cheng Yang and turned her head. Su Lingfeng walked over and rubbed Cheng Yang's head, rolling up the useless design drafts and throwing them into the trash can. I was busy rushing to draft a while ago, and I forgot to dispose of the useless ones, he said, scrapped manuscript. Cheng Yang lowered his head and glanced at the design draft that he had stuffed into the trash can. It looks very nice. Su Lingfeng lowered his head and laughed. It's not easy to hear you compliment me. By the way, he remembered something and looked up at Cheng Yang. What are you here for today? Cheng Yang was slightly taken aback. As soon as he arrived, he was summoned by Grandma Meng to fix the air conditioning, and he almost forgot the main thing. He took out a transparent storage box in a square shape from his shirt pocket, which had been sealed on all four sides and had been drained of air inside. There was a silk orchid stored in an inexplicable way, perfectly preserving the fresh silk orchid just taken off. Su Lingfeng looked down at Cheng Yang's outstretched palm and listened to his explanation. I don't know when you will have time to come to the flower garden to take a look. I happen to be studying making plant specimens these days, so I tried using silk orchids. This well-preserved flower specimen can be preserved for a long time, and even if it's not in the flowering period, you can see its full and beautiful appearance. What he didn't tell Su Lingfeng was that the process of making this specimen was not easy and required constant trial and error in order to grasp the scale and maintain the best state of the specimen at the moment it was picked. He tried for several days before making this relatively satisfactory work. Just as it was done, Cheng Yang changed into clothes and brought it to him. Su Lingfeng took the specimen and looked at it in his hand for a while. When he was in college, his roommate was very interested in making plant specimens. He had seen various works of his roommate, so he naturally knew how difficult the production process was. It was even more difficult for Cheng Yang to achieve this level of silk orchid specimens. But Cheng Yang didn't tell him, and he also chose to pretend not to know that someone had put in a lot of effort to do it. Su Lingfeng walked over to the display cabinet, raised his hand and placed the specimen in the most prominent grid. He turned his head and smiled at him, saying gently, "Thank you, I really like it." Su Lingfeng's voice was already clear and magnetic, and when he spoke the last four words slowly, he couldn't help but feel a touch of tenderness and affection. Cheng Yang was slightly stunned, feeling as if the part of her heart had been lightly scratched with a feather. At noon, Cheng Yang had lunch at home. Shortly after, Su Lingfeng borrowed a light gray electric car from somewhere and stepped on the ground. He nodded at Cheng Yang and said, "Get in the car." Cheng Yang frowned as she looked at the small and somewhat cute electric car, and finally gritted her teeth and sat on it. She asked anxiously, "Is it really okay for it to carry the two of us?" "Don't worry, squatting in front is not a problem." Su Lingfeng handed him a blue helmet and put on the pink one himself. "Put it on, let's go." Cheng Yang looked anxiously at the helmet in her hand, glancing at the other color of the helmet that Su Lingfeng was wearing. In the end, she sighed and obediently put it on her head. Sitting on the electric bike, two big men were clearly crowded. Cheng Yang bent her legs and rubbed her knees against Su Lingfeng's waist. After passing through a bumpy road section, Su Lingfeng freed up one hand and patted his knee, saying in a muffled voice, "You hold back a bit, it's a bit itchy." "How can I hold back a bit?" Cheng Yang pursed her lips with some embarrassment, muttering to herself. After a while, she adjusted her sitting posture slightly. Chapter 9. You are listening at novelfull.audio. It takes about half an hour to go to the town, and there are scattered conversations on the way, which is not too difficult. After finally arriving at the mall in town and parking the car, Su Lingfeng turned his head to pick up the helmet handed over by Cheng Yang. Just as he was about to get off the car, he was suddenly grabbed by the person behind him. "Wait." Cheng Yang frowned, "My legs are numb." Su Lingfeng turned his head and looked at his face with some surprise, but couldn't help but laugh. "Laugh nonsense," Cheng Yang said. After a while, Cheng Yang lifted his leg and was helped out of the car by Su Lingfeng. There is a place selling household appliances on the first floor of the shopping mall, and because it is a workday, there are not many people in the entire mall. Su Lingfeng followed Cheng Yang to visit two stores and felt a bit sleepy. He doesn't understand the differences between these stores, which are also sellers of electricity. If it were him, go in and take a look, and then buy according to the recommendations of the salesperson. But Cheng Yang, who looks like a pampered young master, unexpectedly understands these things. That's it. Cheng Yang strolled to the third store, and the salesperson, Ran, was so boastful that he finally nodded and turned his head to signal Su Lingfeng to pay. After filling in the delivery address, the two of them came out of the store. Su Lingfeng looked at the time and asked, "It's still early. Do you want to take a look? What's there to stroll around with two big men?" Cheng Yang pursed her lips and hesitated for a moment before finally nodding, "Just strolling around the mall." "Okay," Su Lingfeng responded. "There is a relatively large game hall on the third floor, which is probably the most crowded place in the shopping mall on weekdays. There are many men and women who skip classes in nearby universities to play video games. The most popular one is the dance machine with the largest corner area." When they entered the game hall, they happened to see a couple dancing on the dance machine, which attracted many people's attention. Su Lingfeng glanced away and landed on the nearby joystick game console. Arcade games. When Su Lingfeng was in high school, he loved to skip classes and play with his classmates. He often played for an entire afternoon until the school's director stormed into the game hall in anger to catch people, and then he and a few other students sneaked away through the back door. Being lost in thought, a slender hand with a bone finger reached out in front of him, holding a basket of uniquely patterned game coins. Cheng Yang raised his hand slightly, lifted his chin towards him, and said calmly, "Do you want a hand?" "I used to play this a lot." Su Lingfeng narrowed his eyes and said in a certain tone, "You can't play with me." Cheng Yang lowered her head and counted out 4 coins, then threw in 2 each. She smiled and said, "I won. You have to treat me to dinner." "Okay," Su Lingfeng said. Each selected 3 characters. The first one was arranged in the order of PK against Su Lingfeng, which was Grass Pheasant Capital, 8 Gods Temple, and Big Snake. Cheng Yang chose Grass Pheasant Capital, 7 Hool Society, and Fire Dance. Because the choice of the first character was the same, both of them were ultimately burned out by the flames and lay down on the ground. Su Lingfeng turned his head to look at him, and Cheng Yang curled her lips slightly, saying, "I used to have a game console at home and played it for a while." After the second PK began, Su Lingfeng controlled the character to dodge the skill of Chikwai Society, shook the joystick to freeze the person, but saw Chikwai Society enter a defensive position in 1 second, and the freeze failed. However, at the moment when Chikwai Society stood up, Su Lingfeng pressed the skill button and forcefully slid the joystick clockwise, releasing the 8 Gods Temple's gripping skill. The 8 Gods Temple sprinted forward and threw the person to the ground. Then, it grabbed the 7 Grail Society and in just 3 seconds, 2/3 of the 7 Grail Society's health bar fell. After Chikwai Society broke free from control, they quickly lifted their legs and kicked the 8 Gods Temple out of attack range. Then, a thrust was used to press down on the 8 Gods Temple, and a large kick was used in combination to lower the blood bar of the 8 Gods Temple. The countdown to time has ended. The scene shows the victory settlement action of the 7 Shackle Society. Cheng Yang tilted her head and smiled, "Remember to treat me to dinner." A sentence seems like the ending has long been predetermined. Su Lingfeng smiled as he looked at him. He rarely saw Cheng Yang smiling so happily as he did now. More of Cheng Yang was gently pursing her lips, with a faint expression, unable to see the vitality that his age group should have. This kind of Cheng Yang is really attractive. In the last game, Su Lingfeng's Big Snake was also cleared of its health bar by the unknown Fire Dance after winning the 7 Hool Society. The final winner can start again to pass the level, but Cheng Yang didn't continue playing, keeping the competition interface there. He looked at Su Lingfeng with his basket and eyes, which was self-evident. "Okay." Su Lingfeng smiled happily, "What would you like to eat tonight?" "Hot pot." Cheng Yang said. With the remaining game coins in hand, the two of them played almost all the facilities in the game hall, and finally stopped in front of the dance machine. The young couple who were originally dancing hot there had long been gone, replaced by two boys of similar age who were dancing the relatively easy three-star dance. Two girls sat on the chairs behind them, their eyes fixed on them without blinking. There have always been many male and female students who fall in love early at this age. When Su Lingfeng was so old, he also had a youthful relationship. Although the process and results were not good, at least it made his youth more memorable. Su Lingfeng glanced at Cheng Yang, leaned closer, and asked, "Have you ever been in love when you were in high school?" Cheng Yang glanced at him and didn't know what was on his mind. His face changed slightly, and after a while, he said, "No. You look so beautiful, isn't there any girl in high school who likes you?" Su Lingfeng asked again. "Who said early love is necessary in high school?" Cheng Yang sighed lightly and raised her foot to the front desk to save the remaining game coins. She turned her head to Su Lingfeng and said, "I'm hungry." "Let's go eat," Su Lingfeng said. In the evening, many office workers flooded into the mall, mostly old customers who came to eat hot pot. This shopping mall has an old-fashioned hot pot restaurant, which is not too small in scale, but the environment is very good and the service is also very friendly. "Boss, add another plate of beef." The seventh table shouted. A lot of waiters in the hallway shuttle among them. One of them takes a double-flavor hot pot with the seasoned ingredients and walks across the hallway to the number 15 table. He puts the pot on the rack and lights the fire. He smiles brightly at the two male guests at the table. "Two handsome men, the food here is also served, please use it slowly. The ones that are not spicy here use fresh soup pot bottom, which can nourish qi and blood." Su Lingfeng pointed to the left and looked at Cheng Yang, saying, "You eat more, it's good for your health." Cheng Yang looked at him with some black lines and gritted her teeth, saying, "I'm sick, isn't I kidney deficiency? Make up for it all." Su Lingfeng had a smile in his eyes as he spoke and ordered dishes. The things they ordered were not too much, and Cheng Yang ate less. Most of them went into Su Lingfeng's stomach. After eating and drinking enough, the outside sky was already completely dark. There is no sound of cicadas in the town, and the night is even more noisy than in Pingxi village. The various street lights outside shine brightly on the road surface. Su Lingfeng looked out with some emotion and suddenly remembered life in a big city, but it wasn't that he missed the hustle and bustle of the city. Instead, he felt even more tired in his heart and wanted to continue living in Pingxi village. "Let's go." Su Lingfeng paid and returned to the 15th table. "Miss Cheng." A slightly chubby short-haired man in front of table 3 raised his glass and saw the beauty across from him staring at the door with a hint of confusion. He turned his head and looked over. Many people were coming and going at the door, but he still caught a glimpse of one of the familiar figures and raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Why is Su Lingfeng and that sick seedling also here?" "Sorry, Mr. Gao." Chen Yueling regained her senses, raised her glass and touched him, then smiled apologetically at him. "I just saw someone with a back that looked a bit like my old friend. I was momentarily distracted." "It's okay." Gao Quan took a sip of the wine from his glass and said with a smile, "Did you just look at those two young men at the door?" Cheng Yueling looked at him in surprise and said, "Do you know him?" "We are from the same village, and one of them is from my childhood." "Do you know him?" asked Gao Quan. Cheng Yueling shook her head and said, "Do you know the man next to him?" "I don't know his name." Gao Quan paused before saying, "His health has been poor and he hasn't been out much. I'm not familiar with him." Cheng Yueling seemed to be certain of something, took a sip of wine, and fell into silence. "What's wrong?" Gao Quan looked at her suddenly becoming quiet and puzzled. Is it difficult for her to still have some fate with that man who is not in good health? Thinking of this possibility, Gao Quan felt a bit nervous. The woman he liked couldn't be taken away by others, it's okay. Cheng Yueling quickly laughed again. Mr. Gao, don't worry. After drinking all the alcohol, don't be so indecisive. I won't call you Miss Cheng, and you won't call me Mr. Gao either. Just call your name. Gao Quan scratched his head and couldn't quite touch her. Okay, Cheng Yueling didn't have any awkward temperament either. She immediately nodded and said, Gao Quan. That's right. Gao Quan nodded with satisfaction, scalded a chopstick of pork belly, changed the topic, and asked curiously, where will you sing your next play? City A. Cheng Yueling finished speaking and thought of how Gao Quan had helped her. She smiled again and said, if you have time to come, I'll leave you a ticket. Chapter 10. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The weather has not been very good these days, but fortunately it has not affected the blooming period of the silk orchid. It rains lightly or is cloudy, and the temperature has unusually dropped. When the door of the Cheng family was knocked on, Cheng Yang was watering the flower garden while Su Lingfeng was wearing gloves and carefully pulling out the weeds that affected their growth. The knocking on the door was not urgent, it was a very regular 3 short and 1 long sound. Cheng Yang turned his head slightly, and when he heard the sound, his face turned cold and his hands stopped moving. What's wrong? Su Lingfeng also turned his head and listened for a while, feeling a bit strange. It's the first time I've heard someone knocking on the door like this. Yes, because he had rarely heard such a unique knocking sound, now when he heard it, Cheng Yang could tell who was standing outside the door. Do you want to open the door? Su Lingfeng asked. He looked at Cheng Yang. Cheng Yang didn't speak, so he squatted still, pulling grass in his hand without stopping. The knocking outside the door stopped for a while, and then a clear and gentle female voice rang out, Cheng Yang, it's me. The owner of this voice is very familiar. Su Lingfeng almost immediately realized that she was the female lead of the scene she had watched a few days ago. Do Cheng Yang know her? I'll go open the door. Cheng Yang put down the water ladle for a while, stood up, straightened his clothes, and slowly walked over. No matter what was on her mind during the few steps she took, at the moment she opened the door, Cheng Yang still had an uncontrollable calm face. The hand that supported the door frame tightly squeezed the edge of the door, and her fingers turned white. His voice carried the coolness of the rain, and he looked up at the familiar face of the woman in front of him. Without hesitation, he said, Cheng Yueling, what are you doing here? Xiaoyang, how have you been these 2 years? Cheng Yueling seemed unable to hear the unwelcome tone in his voice. She greeted him with a smile and walked straight past him, walking towards the yard. Cheng Yang's eyes grew colder, and he closed the door before following in. Cheng Yueling didn't expect anyone else in his yard, especially a tall, leggy, and good-looking man. As he walked towards the house, he paused and met the man's gaze with a slight smile. Hello, I'm Cheng Yang's sister.in.law. Are you? Su Lingfeng. Su Lingfeng took off his gloves and casually put it aside, saying politely, I am Cheng Yang's neighbor. It turned out to be a neighbor, I thought. Cheng Yueling smiled and was about to continue speaking, but was interrupted by Cheng Yang's cold voice. Cheng Yueling. He spoke with an undisguised warning in his tone, and Cheng Yueling looked back at him, knowing that she didn't say anything further. Su Lingfeng's gaze fell on Cheng Yang's pale face, frowning. From his tone, he keenly sensed the atmosphere between Cheng Yang and his so-called sister.in.law, which was not very harmonious. This woman who claims to be Aunt Cheng Yang is obviously not as kind as she appears on the surface. But this is Cheng Yang's family matter, he can't manage it. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded slightly at Cheng Yang and said, You guys talk, I'll go back first. No need, Cheng Yang stopped him and explained, wait for me in the yard for a while. She won't be able to stay long and will leave. Cheng Yueling didn't refute either, just nodded and instead agreed with Cheng Yang's words. Okay. Su Lingfeng then turned around and returned to the flower garden, grabbed a water ladle, and continued to water the flowers. Cheng Yang and Cheng Yueling entered the house one by one, and as soon as the door connecting the yard closed, the house was divided into two worlds. As soon as he thought of Su Lingfeng standing at the other end of the door, the stone pressing down on Cheng Yang's heart seemed to loosen. "Tell me, what can I do for you?" He stood in front of the French window and asked without looking back. Cheng Yueling sat down on the sofa, poured herself a cup of tea, and then slowly said, "I've been asking someone else for 2 or 3 days to find out where you live. If it weren't for the last time I happened to see someone with a similar back, I wouldn't have known that you actually hid in this place." As she spoke, she smiled again and said, "Although the Cheng family does not allow illegitimate children, you are also a member of the Cheng family's bloodline. You shouldn't be living in such a place. If you want, I can arrange a new place for you, which is better than living here." "No need," Cheng Yang said lightly. "If you're just talking about these things, then you can go." Cheng Yueling's indifferent attitude chilled her heart. The teacup in her hand tightened, and her tone also cooled for a long time. She said, "Why don't you dare to return to the Cheng family? Does Cheng Ziyu make you so scared? He's a waste who only knows how to seek pleasure. You know that if you really want to compete for family property, he won't be able to compete with you. And returning to the Cheng family." Cheng Yueling looked at him up and down, realizing that he had lost a lot of weight compared to before. In the end, her tone softened a bit. "Your illness may be saved. The Cheng family is a powerful and influential family in the capital, and with their connections and means, there may really be a way to save his life. If you let me go back, I'm afraid Cheng Jingye will have a heart attack in the middle of the night." Cheng Yang sneered, "What kind of ghost does the Cheng family look like? We both know it well, and there are actually a few people who want me to go back. I'm afraid they don't just want me to go as far as possible, just die." He died, so Cheng Ziyu no longer had to worry about someone competing for inheritance rights with him. Cheng Jingye would no longer be seen as a laughing stock before and after tea by various families, let alone being an illegitimate child, which was already a shame. "Don't say that," Cheng Yueling frowned. "Even if it's to treat your illness, I have to go back." "You don't have to go through a lot of trouble," Cheng Yang turned to look at her. "I'm going to die sooner or later. His illness may suddenly worsen at some point, and then disappear from this world. Cancer has always been an unsolvable problem. I prefer staying here rather than going to the cage of the Cheng family." Cheng Yang lowered his eyes, his voice so low that only he could hear it. "Every day, observe the scenery, sit and watch the clouds rise. If I could still argue with that person in the yard every day. It's also quite good," he said to himself. Cheng Yueling let out a low sigh, feeling somewhat puzzled as to why both Cheng Yang and his mother were stubborn as if they were carved from the same mold. "Never mind, you think about it. I'll come find you later." Cheng Yueling placed an untouched tea cup on the table, stood up, and whispered, "If you don't want to go back, just live well. 2 things must be done the same." After speaking, she left without looking back. "Live well." Cheng Yang silently repeated the 4 words in her mind. He also wants to live well and live like a normal person. He never tells anyone, and he also lives in the unknown pain of death every day. If he hadn't lived a good life in the world, he wouldn't have been willing to leave. It's okay to say that he is greedy for life and afraid of death, but he doesn't care. There's nothing wrong with wanting to live. A figure walked in from outside, helped him with a pale face, and took him into his arms to soothe him, patting him. Cheng Yang smelled the faint fragrance of silk orchids on his body, and with some attachment, buried his head in his neck, allowing him to gently pat his back like a child, whispering, "It's okay." This is the first time Su Lingfeng has seen such a fragile Cheng Yang. He didn't know that Cheng Yang was afraid of unknown death, but he could clearly feel his fear from his trembling body.